What's up, Tailgaters? You're in the booth with Tailgate Nate today. Welcome to my channel, and today I want to dive on in and talk about some Big 12 chaos. The Big 12 looked like it was going to be a lot simpler in recent years, but if you know the Big 12, you knew it was going to be a little bit more complex than that. We are now starting to see some Big 12 chaos, and with 2 weeks left to go in the college football season, are we going to get even more Big 12 chaos down the line? I'll predict some games this week. I'll tell you about what is exciting to come in the Big 12 moving forward, and just take a look at some of the college football playoff implications, the Big 12 championship game implications, and a lot of other things we'll dive on in and we'll talk about in the Big 12 here in just a little bit. But before we do that, I'll go through my usual spiel. Thank you for supporting the channel any way you can. If you just clicked on this video just to watch it and nothing else, hey, I really appreciate you doing so, for taking time out of your day just to watch. But if you liked it and you want to see more of what I have to say about the college football world, or you're just simply as big of a college football nerd as I am, hit the subscribe button and ring the bell. That would mean a lot to me. You can also support the channel by liking, by commenting, by sharing. Anything else you're willing and able to do to help support the channel would mean a lot to me. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's now talk about some Big 12 chaos. So, when we talk about Big 12 chaos, I mean, you just take a look back at previous seasons and, well, you'll definitely understand what I mean. But especially as it refers to this season, I mean, who thought Arizona, Utah, and Oklahoma State would be the bottom three teams in the Big 12 right now? That is absolutely crazy, and we've already seen Big 12 chaos in the fact of, well, BYU, Arizona State, Iowa State, Baylor, they all are, there we go, towards the top of the Big 12 conference standings leaderboard, right? And especially BYU coming into this week at 9-1, coming into last week 9-0. Who thought that was going to happen, right? That is why this season, the Big 12, well, has still been pretty chaotic. But usually what Big 12 chaos means is there is a ton of just moving around in the standings, and you don't really know who's going to make the Big 12 championship game until the very last week of the season. And even then, there are still like 3 or 4 teams in play. Well, right now, there are 4 teams, in my personal opinion, without a whole bunch of outside chaos that's extremely unlikely to happen within the Big 12, that are going to be making a run at the Big 12 championship game. That is in order of the way that they're listed on the standings board right now: BYU, Colorado, Arizona State, and the Iowa State Cyclones. So let's dive on in and let's talk about a couple of the matchups this week because, well, I'll just talk about one really quickly. Iowa State goes on the road and plays Utah. Utah almost did pull off a win at home against BYU. Now, Iowa State has been reeling. They lost a couple of games. They were able to bounce back and win this past weekend, though. They were able to beat a pretty solid Cincinnati squad. But the thing that makes that interesting is, yes, I know it was a rivalry game. Yes, I know there was a lot of tensions and a lot of other things going on within BYU Utah because it's the battle in Utah, right? It is a rivalry game. So obviously both teams are going to play hard. But Utah, I thought, played pretty well, especially that of Brandon Rose. And if he can play like that and the Utah defense can play like that for a full 4 quarters, I do think they have a real shot to beat the Iowa State Cyclones. Do I think it happens? No. Now, that won't go towards my official record prediction, I think, because the 2 games that I am going to break down in this video for you are BYU going on the road to play Arizona State and Colorado going on the road to play Kansas. And yes, Kansas is on this board. It is on this little graphic, either right down here or right up here, wherever you are seeing that graphic take place, right? That is on the screen for the very reason and the very fact that, look, Kansas is a team that has caused chaos over the past couple of weeks because they pulled off an upset against Iowa State 2 weeks ago, and last week they pulled off an upset against BYU on the road. They can pull off another upset at home against the Colorado Buffaloes this week. And if they are able to do that, I mean, Kansas is the team right now that is dramatically shaping the Big 12 picture. Without that win against Iowa State, without that win against BYU, I mean, yeah, it makes Kansas's season look a lot more disappointing. I think that's a much better team than their 4-6 record says they are, because the biggest myth of college football is you are what your record says you are. No, you're not. Kansas is a prime example because look at what they've done this past 2 weeks. And yeah, you could say, well, Iowa State was coming off an upset loss. They were starting to reel, and, well, BYU's loss felt imminent. But if they are able to beat Colorado this weekend, whew, my goodness, we got to start having to talk about Kansas, and well, it's just going to lead to more Big 12 chaos, which will be the primary focus of any conversation surrounding the Big 12 and surrounding Colorado if Kansas is able to get that win. Right now, BYU and Colorado, if everything stays the way it is right now and people win out, BYU and Colorado would play in the Big 12 championship game, and the winner of that would likely go on to play in the college football playoff. But there is a way for Arizona State still to get in, and guys, it honestly is pretty darn likely, and I honestly do see it happening. I thought a BYU loss was going to come inevitably. I did not think it would come last week to Kansas. I thought it could happen. I just didn't think it would. I thought they were going to be able to survive. But Arizona State this week, this is where I always thought this loss was going to come in, and it's where I think this loss is going to come in now. I have a lot of questions surrounding Jake Retzlaff and this BYU team. And again, BYU has not really had to embody the survive and advance mentality until a little later this season, right? They had to do it against Oklahoma State. They pulled away from UCF late. They absolutely had to do it against Utah. And again, if that defensive holding doesn't get called, who knows what happened? And they couldn't do it against Kansas this past week. Now you have to go on the road to play in Tempe against an Arizona State team that is really, really hot right now. I mean, the main thing for BYU is, are you going to be able to slow down Cam Scadaboo out of that backfield? A 1,000-yard back that's got 11 touchdowns, and he's also the team's second leading receiver as well. But you can't forget about the guy, Jordan Tyson, who's been an absolute just dynamite stick for Arizona State so far this season, 833 yards and 9 touchdowns through the air. Sam Leavitt has come in and done a pretty solid job, honestly. Again, the stat sheet's not going to explode at you, but 1,906 yards, 17 touchdowns, and 4 picks. And the job Kenny Dillingham's been able to do with this team in year 2 has been absolutely extraordinary. I love the way Arizona State is playing football right now. And defensively, when you take a look at what Arizona State has done, I mean, 18 sacks, that definitely is a number that can jump out at you, and it jumps out to me. They have forced 11 picks. They have forced 5 fumbles, so they turn you over. They are able to generate sacks, and Arizona State is just a team to me that is in prime position right now to make a really, really good run at getting into a Big 12 championship game, because if they are able to beat BYU and Colorado is able to win that, well, again, Arizona State and Iowa State don't play each other, but again, if Iowa State loses again later down the line, because Iowa State, they got Utah, they got Kansas State. Those are 2 games that they can lose. At this point, I don't think they do. And Iowa State has got to hope for BYU to pull something out, and they've got to hope for a loss somewhere down the line from Colorado. I think it's a little tricky for Iowa State to find themselves in the Big 12 championship game, but as long as they went out, they do what they're supposed to do. But for that game between BYU and Arizona State this upcoming weekend, I think it's going to be all about the line of scrimmage battle, right? Because BYU, Arizona State, you just heard me say, they can get to the quarterback, they get sacks, they force turnovers. BYU is able to do that as well. On the season, they got 14 sacks, not as high of a sack total as what Arizona State has, but BYU forces turnovers. They got 17 interceptions, 5 forced fumbles on the season. I think the turnover battle going to be a huge play there, and 2 quarterbacks that you probably have a lot of questions about, Jake Retzlaff and Sam Leavitt. Okay, who really is the better quarterback here? What quarterback is going to lead his team? But it's up really to a lot of the role players there as well. Retzlaff has had the better stat line for the majority of this year, apart from that interception total. He does have more yards and touchdowns than what Leavitt has on the other side there. It's a running back by committee room. You have to game plan for a ton of guys. Wide receivers have been dynamic. The BYU defense has made crucial turnovers when it matters most. Arizona State, though, playing at home, and the way BYU has looked over this past, I'd say 2 to 3 weeks, maybe even the past month of college football action, I do think they go down. I think Arizona State's going to be able to get this win. I've thought it for the better part of maybe 2 or 3 weeks now that BYU's first loss would come on the road against Arizona State. Well, I think it's going to be their second loss, and it could be the loss that pushes them out of Big 12 championship game contention, because Arizona State would then hold that head-to-head tiebreaker, and I think both BYU and Arizona State win tiebreakers over Iowa State regardless, maybe due to common opponents or something like that. But the other game I want to talk about in this video really quickly is Colorado and Kansas, and really the only big thing you need to follow along with this is, well, Colorado, do they keep doing their thing, right? Are they going to be able, and a Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter going to be able to make enough plays to get past this Kansas team? Well, Kansas has been very dynamic, and you actually take a look at what Kansas did against BYU from a defensive standpoint last week. Well, they only allowed BYU, yes, 354 yards, but they forced 2 BYU turnovers at some really, really crucial times. They didn't really stop the run that well. They didn't stop the pass that well. And the offense didn't have their best day. But they took advantage of what BYU gave them. And Kansas was able to come out of that with a win. But they played dominating football against the Iowa State Cyclones. I think they're going to have to play dominating football against Colorado here, because I do think Colorado wins this game. And quite simply put, Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, they're just going to be too much. And Travis Hunter making plays both offensively and defensively is going to be able to impact this game significantly. Kansas showed us last week that, I mean, look, sometimes their offense does have off days. If their defense is going to be able to force turnovers and force Colorado miscues, then the game can definitely get really interesting. But I think Shedeur Sanders is going to show out. I think Travis Hunter is going to show out. And I do think Colorado continues on this path to be able to get into the Big 12 championship game. It's a lot of the reason why I think they win the Big 12 right now. And it's why I think they end up in the college football playoff. It's just because it's really hard to stop Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, as well as another wide receiver who I'm going to get his last name right. I always mix it up there. LaJohntay Wester. I always go back and forth between Wester or Webster, but no, LaJohntay Wester, guys, I think he's going to be an excellent value pick to whoever picks him up in the NFL draft. He had over 1,100 yards last year. He's got 660 this year. Is a dynamic wide receiver. You've seen Will Shepherd get some more playing time in there as well. Jimmy Horn Jr. is still a very viable option. Colorado, I think, just has too many weapons, especially on the outside. They're too dynamic, and I don't think this Kansas secondary can keep up, because one thing Kansas struggles with is being able to defend outside the hashes in teams that can really spread you out, like what Colorado can. They might not have a great run game offensively or defensively, but Colorado's explosive enough to survive that upset against Kansas. I do think the Jayhawks keep it close, though. I think Jane Daniels and company are going to have a bounce-back offensive game. I just do not think that it goes the way of the Jayhawks in this contest. I do believe that we will see Colorado being able to win that game, and they will be moving on and staying on top of the Big 12 here, because again, I think Arizona State loses. So at that point, BYU's got 2 losses, Iowa State loses, and Arizona State loses. I want to talk about college football playoff implications for the Big 12, not only this week, but next week as well, because when you take a look at the Big 12 schedule this week, obviously there are a lot of really big games. Colorado at Kansas. Yeah, that's an upset potential game. BYU at Arizona State. Again, that's a ranked versus ranked matchup and a huge game in the college football landscape. Iowa State going on the road to play Utah. If they get upset, they're out of the Big 12 conference championship race. But then you take a look at what is happening next week, and I mean, every Big 12 contender, there really is no one that, I mean, plays another contender. Colorado has a home game against Oklahoma State, and the Pokes have not been a good football team this year for most of the season. Apart from that that 3-0 start, they've lost 7 straight. Arizona State goes on the road to play Arizona, which I wouldn't sleep on that one. I think that one can be a little bit tricky. Kansas State has got Iowa State, and Kansas State probably not going to make the Big 12 championship game, but they can definitely spoil Iowa State's chances too. And BYU has got Houston at home, who's a pretty solid team, and Willie Fritz's group has been able to come along as the season goes down. This week, though, is the most important week for the Big 12, and I think we're going to have a pretty good idea of who's getting into the Big 12 championship game. In fact, we might even know, because if Colorado wins this week, I don't think there's a way they fall out of the Big 12 championship race. Maybe there is due to a lot of other tiebreakers and things, but if Colorado wins this week, they survive that game against Kansas. I don't see how they don't beat Oklahoma State and make the Big 12 championship game. But again, the decision is going to come to one of these other 3 teams down here: BYU, Iowa State, and the Arizona State Sun Devils. That BYU-Arizona State game this week is absolutely huge. If BYU loses that one, well, obviously they lose that tiebreaker to Arizona State, and then you're just going to have to be able to take care of business against Houston and hope that Arizona State loses to Arizona in that last week of the regular season. But if BYU wins, well, then Arizona is done. We don't have to talk about the Sun Devils making the Big 12 championship game anymore, because, well, it's not going to happen. And I didn't say that because it's not like I don't like talking about it. I think it's great. Who would have imagined before the season we'd have an Arizona State Colorado Big 12 championship game? That's the way that I think it's trending. And if I were to put sort of my money where my mouth is, I'm not a betting man, but if I was, I would go ahead and say I think Arizona State Colorado makes the Big 12 championship game right now. And I do think that could end up being a very entertaining, very fascinating game. But the way the Big 12 is shaping out right now, there also technically is a way for the Big 12 champ to miss out on the college football playoff. Because what if Colorado loses to Kansas, and what if BYU loses to Arizona State this week, and then all those teams win, or maybe even all those teams lose? It'd especially be devastating if all those teams lose. But the more likely scenario is Kansas pulls off the upset against Colorado, and Arizona State pulls off the upset against BYU. You would also probably need Army to beat Notre Dame if this scenario were to have happened, which is not necessarily super likely, but it's a thing that could still definitely happen. This is a Big 12 conference right now that is staring on the outside looking in of the college football playoff in terms of getting a top 4 seed. I mean, right now, the winner of the Big 12 championship game is in line to get into the college football playoff, just with the way that a lot of other things in the nation project to have happen, especially that Notre Dame and Army game, because obviously if Notre Dame wins, then this whole point is moot. But if Army is able to beat the Notre Dame Fighting Irish and Big 12 has some more upset chaos like we've seen in recent weeks, that could spell trouble for the Big 12. Do I think the Big 12 champ gets left out? No, not at all. Is there a world where they do? Yeah, I could definitely see it, especially if there are some upsets. If Army goes on and stays undefeated, then Army would take over Notre Dame's spot at that rate if they stay undefeated, win the American Athletic Conference championship game. And again, it would just depend on how the committee is ranking teams. But this Big 12 race down the stretch is going to be very fascinating to watch. I'm going to be very interested to watch this week. And if you want my predictions, here you go. I think Colorado beats Kansas by at least 10 points. I think the Jayhawks keep it close within striking distance, but much like my opinion with the Indiana game, they're never going to be able to get over that hump. And then Arizona State, I think, is going to be able to not pretty easily, but pretty solidly handle the BYU Cougars. I think that has the potential to be a back and forth game, but I think as soon as Arizona State gets that lead, I don't think they're going to let it go. So I think the Sun Devils win, and yes, I do think the Cyclones survive on the road against the Utah Utes. Not enough offense for me for Utah to really trust them in that one, and Iowa State's going to do everything they can to try to give themselves a shot to play in the Big 12 title game. We'll have to see how tiebreakers and everything works out. I don't have that information in front of me like I did with the SEC, so apologies for that, but the way it's shaping out right now, if the way my predictions go, and my predictions are true, I think it's going to be Colorado and Arizona State. That's your Big 12 championship game. Wanted to talk a little bit about the Big 12 today. If you got any thoughts on this conference, please leave them in the comment section down below. Remember to play hard but tailgate harder, and I will see all of you guys in the next video. Goodbye. Enjoy your college football Saturday.